This webinar is brought to you by the President's Council, and my name is Erica Pinnock, the Executive Director. Today's webinar is designed for direct question and answer and to create an environment that is truly interactive. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the President's Council website. We also encourage and welcome the opportunity to connect via phone, email, and web chat. Before we get started, please note your video should be automatically turned off and devices muted. If not, please do so at this time. As you have questions or comments, please insert it in the Q&A thread and we will pause frequently to respond. If you have a question or comment for the presenter, please click the raise your hand button and we will pause to recognize you, at which time we ask that your device be unmuted and your video turned on. Today's expert presenter is Cheryl Perez, founder and president of Big HR, a leading human resources consulting and outsourcing firm focused on serving businesses throughout Northeast Ohio. With nearly 20 years of experience in the employee benefits and HR fields and a reputation for her expertise in service excellence, Cheryl is proud to lead her team at Big HR in relieving clients of one of the most stressful yet most critical aspects of running a business by providing cost-effective HR support and compliance services to small and mid-sized businesses. Cheryl, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Erica.
As we reopen our doors to a new normal of doing business, HR is a critical component to protecting both our employees and our business. Walk us through what we need to know and do as we resume business operations.
All right. Welcome, everybody. How is everyone this morning? I hope everyone is staying safe and continuing to wash their hands and social distance and wear their masks. I am very excited to be here with you guys today and really to talk to you about all the stuff that's going on and all the things that might be going around in your mind around how, as a small business, you are supposed to continue to function, continue to grow, and continue to push forward, motivating your team and protecting your team in this crazy sci-fi movie it feels like we are living in. My name is Cheryl Perez. As was mentioned, I am the president and CEO of Big HR, as well as Cheryl C. Perez brand of companies. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today. There have been such a plethora of questions that have come to me from clients, from friends, from family, from colleagues, from people that I mentor and coach and train. And the questions all seem to be surrounding the fact that it is just not business as usual anymore. Our new normal is here, and it's very, very hard to understand what everyone is supposed to do, what employers are responsible for, what can happen, what employees can do, what you need to do from an HR perspective, even if you're still growing and building your HR into the future and you're looking to hire and grow your team. COVID-19 and this pandemic has definitely put a bit of a wrench and added definitely some challenges to what everyone is trying to do to grow their businesses. So today I am here to focus on helping you figure that out so that you and your business can really make it through this whole thing and make sure that you've got the right information, the right tips, and the right tools in order to be able to move forward. And so throughout the presentation today, I also want to encourage you to hang out for the whole thing, get to the question and answer session, because if you do, I've got a free tip or tool for you, actually, that is going to be extremely helpful as you create your playbook for your back to work situation, focusing after the pandemic and COVID-19. So let's start out by talking about what are we currently up against as we begin to reopen our doors. And I'm going to be focusing specifically on, from a human resource perspective, from your employees aspect, from, what they can and cannot do, and also your current team and your future team. What are you really going to be up against as a small business employer? and really what's next for you and your business, because those are critical. So I wanted to start by just doing a brief overview of what's currently going on in our community. And these are the reopening policies that apply generally to all businesses. And I just want to make sure that we've touched on them, because we really can't get into what you can and cannot do from an employer perspective until we really understand Ohio's reopening policies. And I do want to let you guys know, these have actually been updated even since the creation of this particular information, because as you guys know, it's changing every single day, all day long. And so the best place to get the most current and up-to-date information is at our COVID-19 website with ohio.gov. It is an amazing resource tool, and I feel like they update it all the time, but obviously my job is to stay on top of what things look like as well. So right now, from this perspective, just generally the top 5 reopening policies that exist is that employers are required to provide face coverings and to have face coverings for their employees. And they are supposed to recommend them for their clients and customers at all times. So the fact that customers being required to wear masks really does depend upon that particular business. You can choose to require it, or you can choose to make it optional. But from an employee perspective, you are required to tell your employees to wear face coverings. And how and when at your place of business is going to be totally up to you. And we're going to get into that here shortly. You also are encouraged to conduct daily health assessments with your employees during a self-evaluation, and also with things like temperature checking or question and answer sessions daily. There's a lot of businesses that have adopted this practice, and because your goal is to determine if an employee is fit for duty. And employees are also really encouraged to make sure that if they're feeling anything, if they are symptomatic, if they're not feeling well, to make sure that they do that self-evaluation to make sure that they are fit for duty as well. So conducting daily health assessments is a policy, maintaining good hygiene, obviously at all times, hand washing, sanitizing, social distancing, also cleaning and sanitizing workplaces throughout the day and at the close of business in between shifts. And then also limiting capacity so that you can meet social distancing guidelines, and establishing, even for your staff, a maximum capacity of 50% of what you previously held. And also to make sure that you can use appointment setting where possible to limit congestion in your workplace for both your employees and for your customers and clients. So with that being said, and really understanding all of those things, you can look at these 5 points and really understand how difficult it might be for some small businesses to really just meet these minimum guidelines. Obviously, there's going to be more strict guidelines for different industries. There's very specific guidelines that came out for hair salons and barbershops and fitness centers and gyms and restaurants. They're all very specific, but generally, even just these top 5 can be very difficult for a small business to implement. They all require cost. They all require some money, and obviously, being in a pandemic, a lot of people's businesses have been disrupted, and so revenue isn't at the same level that it used to be. So what is a small business supposed to do? Well, you really do have to focus and prioritize a return to work game plan for your business. And I'm going to talk to you about what the game plan should look like, because I really do strongly feel that you need to have a playbook. You need to have it spelled out in one place. So oftentimes when people say, well, what is a playbook, Cheryl? What are you looking for in this playbook? I always say, think of it almost like everyone has an employee handbook. If you've got staff and you're an employer, you should have an employee handbook in place. That's your overall general policy and procedure for your place of employment and for your business. Well, when you think about this pandemic, this return to work playbook is really almost like your COVID-19 employee handbook. And these are very specific to contagions and diseases and infectious diseases and virus spread and COVID-19 protection as it relates to your place of employment. So it's a whole separate, almost employee guide. So where should you start in kind of creating this playbook, this game plan in going back to work? Well, I always tell people there's 4 areas that you really want to start in. And the 5th one is kind of putting together the document itself. But before you even begin to put together the document, I encourage everyone to kind of gather their team. your key stakeholders, any managers or supervisors, yourself, any advisors, any key players at your place of business, and start to work through what your messaging is going to look like, what your new policies and procedures are going to look like, and what the game plan and framework is going to be. And in that conversation, as you're discussing these different things, like how we're going to change the workplace, how we're going to move desks, how we're going to encourage social distancing, how we're going to provide masks, you really need to pick and identify one point of contact, a workplace coordinator who will be responsible for all COVID-19 related issues and how they're going to impact your workplace. The reality is, guys, yes, we are reopening our economy. You notice how everyone keeps saying we're reopening the economy? They're not saying we are out of quarantine, we're reopening outside, we're reopening the environment. They are saying we are reopening the economy. And they're using that wording specifically because that's what they're doing. They are not encouraging people to continue to go out and just overly indulge in not social distancing and being super social. They're basically saying we're just reopening the economy so that we can get some money flowing. But COVID-19 still exists. That's the bottom line. Still exists. There isn't a vaccine. It's still very viral. It's still very spreadable. And so even when you open, COVID-19 isn't going away. People can still get it. People can still get sick from it. There can still be sick leave. So you need to have a workplace coordinator in place who is going to be a primary point of contact for questions, for concerns, for your COVID-19 handbook and policies, but also to be able to oversee and keep your organization abreast of what changes are coming down the pipe and how to stay compliant with the new rules and regulations. And so I encourage you to pick a person. That could be and should be, for most instances, whoever handles human resources at your organization. And if you're a really small business, it's probably you. So congratulations, you just got another hat to wear. But that's what we oftentimes have as entrepreneurs, right? So once you identify who that primary point of contact is, you guys need to really sit down and discuss the following areas and create a playbook for use in your organization. And we're going to get into those areas here shortly. But while you're doing that, you also want to schedule an all staff training. Anybody who is a volunteer at your organization, who is a contractor at your organization, who is an employee at your organization, schedule an all staff training, jump on a Zoom call, have a meeting, and begin to roll out and discuss the specifics of the playbook that you finalize. You need to get it on the schedule. So even while you're finalizing your playbook, just go ahead and get it on the schedule for 7 days or 8 days from now, you know, a business week or 10 business days, whatever it is that you're looking at, and get it on the schedule. Once you do that, that's going to be your deadline to make sure that you've got your game plan and your playbook completed. So make sure that you roll it out, because you have to communicate these, or you're going to constantly be fighting fires, and you're going to have a lot of unnecessary downtime and wasted efficiency if you're constantly answering questions that, had you addressed it in the very beginning, would have been taken care of from your staff. So I encourage that all staff training. So when I talk about the following areas, let's dive into those, because there's 3 areas that I really want you to finalize in your game plan and in your playbook that's going to incorporate those state guidelines, but also make sure that you are doing your duty of care responsibility as an employer. And that duty of care is to protect your employees. Otherwise, you can be held liable in some instances, and that's very important. So area number 1 that I want to discuss, and at the end of each area as we discuss it, I am going to open it up for questions just to check in and see where we are. So if you're thinking about things as I'm talking, please make sure that you go ahead and type those in the chat so that we can answer them. But area number 1 is you have to focus on how you, in your playbook, are going to reduce transmission opportunities for your team. Okay, reducing transmission. So there's some basic steps to ensuring safety. First, you have to minimize the risks. So a big part of reducing transmission is minimizing the risks. So you have to implement social distancing in your place of business. So you have to reduce or eliminate any shared supplies or workstations, and add plastic barriers when a 6-foot distance is not possible. So if you have a very small space, and let's just say you've got 4 or 5 desks set up in one room, and you cannot guarantee that 6-foot distance as an employer, then you really need to think about adding plastic barriers, adding some type of barrier in between, or eliminating a desk so that you can spread out the remaining desks, or shifting how employees come in and out of work so that not everyone is sitting at their desk that isn't social distance at the same time. If you can do social distancing at your place of employment, great, but make sure that if you can't, you've done some type of effort to keep people distant from one another. And also be careful of shared supplies or workstations. That's very, very important. So always do a double check. I know for my team and myself, when I started bringing people back, I made sure that we used to have kind of a mailing station almost set up in our kitchen where we had, like a 3-hole punch, and we had our stapler for large things. We had our mail machine. We had an extra stapler. We had, just some supplies. I had to remove all of that because that was all shared. And I had to make sure that every employee that I have had their own stapler, their own 3-hole punch, had their own, pens and pencils and all of those types of things. And I had to change all of the mailboxes. We had a joint mailbox area where everyone would kind of go. Eliminated that. Now everyone has mailboxes, on their desks where their mail can be dropped off. So some of those types of things that minimize risk for shared equipment is going to be very important. So think that through. What can you do? What do you need to do in order to minimize risks? And then also implementing a policy that mandates that the sick stay at home and that they seek treatment and that they follow self-quarantine procedures. Gone are the days where we can all giggle when an employee comes in with a box of tissue and a bag of NyQuil and their nose is all red and they don't feel well. And you in the back of your mind as the business owner is thinking, I love that employee. They come to work when they're sick. Because we all think about that, right? As small business owners, we always want to high five the employee that comes to work sick anyway. Well, no longer can we high five them. I know for me, I'm thinking this has great leadership potential here. This person, plows through, but no longer is plowing through acceptable. So you have to make sure that they stay home. If they appear sick, if they're sneezing, if they've got that box of tissue, if they're walking around with Vicks, send them home and make sure that they're self-quarantining. We have to assume that it's COVID-19 related and make sure that you take the necessary precautions. And then you also want to make sure that you provide all of the resources that your employees need, their technology tools, their supplies, all of those things, and keep them at a distance and make sure that they have what they need to be able to function without having to touch one another. And then you also want to institute some daily practices, temperature checks, right? Ideally infrared ones that are touchless. Go grab one of those new thermometers that are out where you can just hold it close to someone's head. It tells you. A lot of companies have instituted that automatically when employees come in. They also instituted health screening questions, especially after the long weekend. For instance, I had a client that I had a discussion with yesterday that said, everybody was gone over the weekend. I don't know how many people continued to social distance, how many people went to parties. What should I do? I said, begin to institute your temp checks and your health screening questions, and add to those health screening questions, did you participate in a large gathering over the weekend since the last time you were at work? Did you participate or leave the state? Those types of questions, because that was a big concern for her. So those are the types of essential health screening questions that you want to ask from everyone every day. And then you also want to make sure that you've got protective supplies available for everyone, not just your team. So order a bunch of masks. I get that question a lot. Do we have to provide the masks? Well, if you're requiring masks be worn, then yes, you should provide them, but your employees can also bring in their own. But make sure you've got enough available. Go on Amazon, order a bunch of them, and make sure that they're available even for people who just kind of pop into your office. Be prepared. And if someone gets sick, what can you do? What should you do? You need to send them home. This is a big part of your reducing transmission policy in your playbook. Send them home immediately. They should self-isolate for a minimum of 14 days after a suspected transmission or exposure to someone. And then other employees do need to be aware. So this is a very tricky spot for most folks. You have to inform other employees who may have been exposed to someone who is suspected or in quarantine or may have been exposed to COVID-19. But what you cannot do is share too much information, because healthcare and HIPAA and privacy still really applies. So what you're allowed to share is if that person was in close proximity to other employees, and you need to let them know that they may have been exposed. So you just communicate with them. You may have been exposed to COVID-19. We're informing you of your need to self-quarantine for the next 14 days. And if you start to experience any symptoms, please get checked out. You don't need to let them know how they were exposed or who exposed them. You cannot let them know who exposed them. But you do have a duty to let them know that they may have been exposed to COVID-19. And you need to shut your complete office down and get it completely professionally sanitized before you let anybody else come back into work. So that is kind of a big deal. Do not share and say, John got COVID. We think John got COVID. And then, that obviously violates healthcare and HIPAA as well. So before we get into area number 2, I see that there's some questions in there. So do we have some questions, Erica, that we want to answer?
I asked a question, and it's in regard to any discrimination risks associated with these practices.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So discrimination risks. EEO and ADA are always in play when it comes to human resources. EEO is Equal Employment Opportunity, ADA is Americans with Disability Act. Both of them have come out with very specific guidance surrounding COVID-19. Now, while they all still stand, meaning you cannot indiscriminately just, only, for instance, temperature check certain people. So for instance, if you've got employees that are younger and you just have this belief in your head that young people are not paying attention, they're not social distancing, and they're out partying all weekend. So you decide on Monday that you just want to temperature check all the millennials that come through the door. That is discriminatory. The actual act of temperature checking, however, is not discriminatory as long as you do it consistently amongst your staff. The key with human resources is consistency, doing the same thing with everybody and making sure that you document everything, communicate up front, and then you'll be covered. So those are kind of the 3 rules of HR. And so, no, temperature checking and asking those questions is not discriminatory, but if you do it to only certain populations, then yes, that can be perceived to be discriminatory. As far as ADA is concerned, people with disabilities, there's been a lot of questions surrounding masks and folks with disabilities. It's not discriminatory to require your employees to wear masks. They've come out with that language. However, if an employee can show that there is a medical reason why they cannot wear a mask or show a disability and which prevents them from being able to wear a mask that is supported by a physician, then you can work on how you're going to make accommodations for that particular employee. So yes, you cannot single anyone out. You have to ultimately do the same thing for every single person, and you should be good to go. So hopefully that
makes sense. That makes sense.
Any other questions? All right, well, let's keep it moving then. Let's talk about area number 2. And which other area you want to make sure you're addressing, thinking through, and putting in place for your team. And it's practices and policies on healthy business operations. That's really important. So as an employer, beyond providing reduction of transmission and beyond providing, PPE and beyond providing, Clorox wipes at every station and beyond saying every 2 hours I need everybody to spray everything down, you also need to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to prepare your business for a sudden change. We've all experienced it. When the governor first shut down our state, a lot of businesses were completely taken by surprise and ultimately did not have the proper sick leave policies and procedures in place, didn't have the proper notification policies and procedures in place, didn't know what they could and could not do. So moving forward, because we know COVID-19 is still here and we know that people can still get it pretty easily, you need to make sure that you have beefed up and that you have become more flexible in your sick leave policies and that you know all of your procedures in and out. All of your employees know exactly what to do. So we're going back to that workplace coordinator that I talked about, right? That's the point of contact for COVID-19 related illnesses. So an employee, if they feel like they're sick, they get up in the morning, they feel like they're having symptoms, they can't come to work. What are they supposed to do? What's step 1? Who do they call? Do they have to send an email? Do they have to call a hotline? Do they call that person directly? Do they follow up with something in writing? What do you want? Do they have to fill out a form? What is it that needs to look like? And then how flexible are you going to be in that situation? Because I need you guys to remember that there is a COVID-19 coronavirus response Response Act that is currently in play. And that Coronavirus Response Act implemented emergency family and medical leave. It expanded it. And the reason why I'm talking about it is because FMLA, guys, no longer applies to employers that have over 50 employees anymore. It applies to all of us. It applies to every single employer with less than 500 employees through December 31st, 2020 this year. And emergency family medical leave basically expands the coverage for employer sizes. So all employers, even tiny ones, if you've got 2 employees, this applies. It also expanded the employment period versus regular FMLA. Now with emergency family medical leave, the person only needs to be working with you for 30 days prior to coming. And the reasons are 12 weeks of job protected leave that ultimately is also paid leave, and I'll get into that in just a little bit, for any employee who is unable to work or telework in order to care for a child under the age of 18 due to a school closure. So I get this question a lot, and I'll open this up for some more questions after I kind of run through the details of this, because I always get a lot of questions about it. But it also includes paid leave after the first 10 days of leave. 2/3 of the employee's regular rate for the number of hours that they are normally scheduled must be paid to them after the first 10 days for up to 12 weeks. So that is for your full-time employees. They're eligible for 2/3 of their regular rate. And part-time employees, you would calculate their average number of hours worked over the last 26 weeks, and they would also be eligible for the 2/3 or 66.67%. But there is a limit to $200 a day, or a 12-week limit of $10,000 per employee. So the big component of emergency family medical leave that's very different than our regular FMLA is that it's now paid. So you have to pay them, and it also guarantees them job restoration. So any obligation for employers with 25 employees or more, and exclusions are subject to making reasonable attempts. We were waiting for a very long time for them to come out with some language for the DOJ the DOL to come out with language saying, are there exceptions? Can groups with a smaller size, and I get this question a lot. If it causes undue hardship on your business and you can prove that it's going to cause undue hardship, you could be eligible for some exceptions, but be prepared to be flexible in your paid sick leave policies, because emergency family medical leave is here for employers of all sizes. And that act also incorporated emergency paid sick leave, which is totally different than emergency family medical leave. But the emergency paid sick leave, same thing, employers with fewer than 500 employees. So even if you got 2, regardless of how long they've worked for you, you have to provide them with up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. They get their regular rate if they themselves are sick. They get 2/3 if they have to care for someone else. And the exception, however, is for employers who are healthcare providers or emergency responders, or who is our frontline folk. So they aren't necessarily eligible for the 80 hours worth of paid sick leave. But it basically ensures and covers for any COVID-related sick leave that is taking place. So if someone is in quarantine because they've been exposed, someone has been diagnosed positive, someone has been contacted through contact tracing and said that you've been exposed, someone has to care for someone else who has been exposed, they can come to you and say, I need to take emergency sick leave, and they will get paid for those 2 weeks, whether your current sick leave policy states that they will or not. So before I move on to benefits and stuff like that and talking about how that's incorporated, I want to also open it up because I saw a couple of questions that came in. So do we have some questions, Erica?
Of course, I had another question. It's in regard to 1099 or contract employees. What responsibilities does a business have with regard to contract employees and following the COVID response playbook when meeting with business clients?
They have the same responsibilities as your regular staff would if they are contracted with you to represent your company or to be out with clients on behalf of your company. So you're asking if you've got kind of regular 1099 contractors that are actually delivering services for you?
Yes, correct.
Yes. So they have the same obligations to follow your playbook as your regular employees do. The similar thing would be with volunteers. If they do not want to follow your playbook, then you need to terminate their contract and look for other independent contractors who will, because you have an obligation to keep that in place. And your contractors, especially if they're out with your customers or your clients, they are not necessarily going to be subject to your employee policies, but because of this pandemic, your employee manual, employee handbook policies, because they're not an employee, but because of this pandemic, you need to make sure that your playbook and your policy says it covers all independent contractors, all W-2 employees, all volunteers, all interns, any type of work class that you recognize in your employee handbook. They are covered.
Got it.
Is that helpful?
Yes, that was very
perfect. So do we have any other questions right now?
There are no other hands raised right now. Please, if you have questions, raise your hand. You can ask it live, or you can submit your question in the chat box.
Perfect. Okay, so as we're continuing to think through this playbook and the areas that you need to focus on, you need to be flexible with your policies, and that's one of the things that we've talked about, right? Because be prepared, even if you're a small employer, for having to pay for sick leave and emergency family medical leave, and also really understanding what your obligations are from a benefits perspective, because COBRA and state continuation still apply, even in a pandemic America. And COBRA obviously extends to employers that have more than 20 employees that offer benefits, giving them the option to maintain their coverage. And for employers with less than 25 employees, state continuation also applies in the state of Ohio. It always has. None of those things are changing when it comes to what employers' obligations are. They are still and apply the exact same way that they always have. So keep that in mind. If you do end up laying someone off, or someone ends up going away, or they're terminated voluntarily or involuntarily, then your COBRA rules and your state continuation rules still apply. Another question that I get a lot is if I have union employees, what can I do? And what am I allowed to do from a layoff perspective, or what am I allowed to do from a furlough perspective, or what am I allowed to do from an enforcement of this playbook perspective? And I always tell people collective bargaining agreements will still prevail. If you have a CBA, which you should, if you've got a union, check your CBA. That CBA will dictate what you can and cannot do, and which policies of yours that you're implementing in your playbook apply to the union employees. Now, I do have several clients, especially larger ones right now, that because of the situation, the union reps and the employer are sitting down amicably at the table, and they are having those discussions about tweaking things and coming up with conclusions so that everybody can kind of get through this. And I think that that will continue to play out and continue to happen, but your CBAs do still prevail. And you want to also just make sure that you assess your essential functions, and just kind of keep things in a perspective of, what do I have to have at the office or live face to face, and what can we ultimately continue to do if we've had people working from home? Can we continue to keep them in that work from home environment? So how do you move forward and make sure that you understand which essential functions can still be achieved remotely, which ones can't, and only focus on bringing people back to work, or back into the office, I should say, that cannot function essentially from home. If your employee or your position can, let them stay at home, let them continue their remote work. And keep in mind that some employees may just feel uncomfortable about returning to work. And yes, you should. And if you can, you should accommodate them. And that's a big part of that communication strategy that I talked about in the very beginning. Schedule a training, a communication. Employees will feel better when they know what your practices are going to be, when they know that you're instituting sanitation schedules, when they know that you're providing masks, when they know that you're limiting contact with the outside, when they know that you've social distanced, when they know that you've separated the workspaces. People will begin to feel more comfortable. If you kind of keep all the information to yourself, they won't know, and they'll continue to feel uncomfortable. And that's when you're going to really be dealing with employees, even when you give them a return to work order saying, I don't want to come back. I'm too afraid to come back. Also keep in mind how your employees or your contractors are interacting with clients and travel. If you can refrain them from in-person contact, please do so. Make sure that you've got your Zoom accounts and all of those things up and running. And travel would also be something that I would say should, not really be an option. It's just, unless it's absolutely essential, right? Unless it's absolutely essential. And then clients and customers should also be informed very thoroughly of what protective measures you have in place when it comes to a service perspective. And then you also want to make sure that you are prepared for possible spikes in absenteeism. As a small business, it is very, very difficult to pick up the ball and run with it if you have large amounts of absenteeism, especially if you do not have your processes and your procedures accurately documented as a small business. This is a whole soapbox that I get on all the time, but as small businesses, we need to make sure that we are documenting the step-by-step processes that it takes to get work done in our organization. We need to make sure we have them documented, because at any time, someone who was doing the job could not be present. And if they're not present, that job, that function, that customer service cannot stop. So you have to make sure that you know what your employees' jobs are, how they do them, how they're effectively done. Document it. Do not put it off. It is a priority, and make sure that everybody knows what it takes to get something done. Because if you do have a spike in absenteeism, they are expecting spikes in the COVID-19 diagnoses, and they are expecting different waves and second waves. You've got to be prepared for that, especially if you weren't prepared the first time. So if there's nothing that you learned from the first time, make sure that you know exactly what everyone's job is, because if everybody gets sick and you have to do all the jobs, you need to know how to do them. That's really, really important. And then also giving you guys some tips and tools now on how you can institute social distancing policies. These are some great things that we've done and we've set up with our clients, and that I've worked with students on and trained. One great tip is to stagger start times, lunch times, break times, and end times. So not everybody is coming into the office at 9 o'clock, right? So 3 people start at 8:30, 3 people start at 9, 3 people start at 9:30. Lunch is not from 12 to 1 for everyone. And if you don't dictate lunchtime, people don't punch in and out, just ask everyone, when are you going to take lunch, so that you know when everyone is taking lunch. If you have a kitchen that's shared or something like that in your place of business that people might need to go into, just do everything you can to stagger their access to it. And then obviously we've talked about adding space requirements, using physical barriers, and then using remote and virtual meetings as much as possible. So the third area that we really want to talk about that you have to put in your return to work playbook is, what practices and policies are you going to put in place to maintain a healthy work environment? So you want to make sure that your daily practices are up to par. There are tons of posters, tons of signage, tons of things out there right now that talk about the respiratory and hygiene practices, routine environmental cleaning and disinfecting, and training people on how to do all of those things. Grab those posters, put them up everywhere. Remind people to wash their hands. There's a reason why for years we've seen those in bathrooms when we go to restaurants and it says employees are required to wash their hands, because people forget. So make sure that you keep that signage, those trainings, and also that you are prepared for enhanced cleaning and disinfection after a known or suspected COVID-19 diagnosis. Was on the phone yesterday with a client who has a exposure situation at their place of business. And because we had put their playbook together before all of this went down, they already had established a relationship with a professional cleaning company. They were able to call right away, get them scheduled, so they were not down and out for more than one day. And that's a critical piece. If you got an exposure at your place of business and you're not prepared, you don't have a contact, you don't have a professional cleaning contact, you haven't established a relationship or an account, then it could take you 4 or 5 days to get your place of business cleaned before everybody can come back to work. And that means 4 or 5 days that you can't run. That's 4 or 5 days that you can't make money. So being prepared in advance, again, stops you from having to deal with that fire on the back end. When you're working on your playbook, think about what that enhanced cleaning and disinfection is going to look like, and begin to make your contacts and put things in place immediately. It is completely up to you to do what is right for your employees and for your customers. And you have to take responsibility for making sure that you're communicating, that you've thought about everything proactively, and that you're taking the necessary steps to create that playbook and almost to answer everyone's questions before they even come up. That's when you know your leadership game is on point. It is top notch when you are proactively addressing the questions before they even come. The more information people have, the less questions that exist, the more comfortable, the more tolerant, the more understanding, and the better off everybody will be. So let's talk about what the major takeaways were from what we talked about today, and some of the things I want you to walk away with in your, I think we have a question. Do we have a question before I get into that?
Yes, we have a question. It says, if you know your coworker has COVID and they still want to come in, is it a HIPAA violation if you let the employer know?
Okay, that is a good question. No, it is not a HIPAA violation. If your coworker is your friend and you are not their employer, right? You're not their supervisor, even if you are their supervisor, but you're just their friend, and your coworker who's your friend or acquaintance come to you and said, I think I have COVID, or I got tested and it came back positive, but I'm still going to work. You are not under a HIPAA obligation to not tell your employer as a fellow employee. Your employee, that your friend told you their health story. So they already gave you the information. You as a coworker should definitely do everything that you can to encourage them to not come in, but you do have an obligation, not an obligation, but you can tell your employer, hey, she got diagnosed. I think you need to address it. You are not violating HIPAA as a coworker. Now, as an employer, if an employee comes to you and tells you that and they still want to come in, obviously you can stop them from coming in, but you can't tell the rest of your staff, Janet has COVID. You know what I mean? You can't tie the diagnosis to any personal information, personally identifying information. But no, you're not violating HIPAA as a coworker if you get scared and tell your boss.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions so far?
I have another question. You
Sure.
talked earlier about providing technology and making certain that your employees have the right technology. Are you required as an employer to provide that technology to the employees if they want to work remotely?
Yeah, so that's been a huge, a huge question. Technically, if you are requiring an employee to work from home, as an employer, you should provide them with their tools, the stuff that they need to ultimately function effectively and do their jobs well from home. So that could include making sure that everybody has a box of supplies to take with them. And I have a client that has been very, very proactive in preparing because they've had a couple of COVID quarantine situations. So she, in essence, tells everyone to make sure that they've got kind of a to-go bag ready to go, and they should take it home with them every single night. And in that to-go bag, she's given everyone, pens and stapler and all that kind of stuff, extra supplies, because if something goes down and the next day the place has to be closed, they still have their kind of to-go bag to work from. But yes, employees should be given a computer to work from home. They need it. If they need to print, which, a lot of people, I think, believe that they need to print everything, and now have learned they don't need to print anything. But yes, you should do your due diligence, if at all possible, to provide them with as much support as possible, especially if they, are working for you. You really also, as an employer, don't want your employees using their personal stuff to access your business records, your business information, those kinds of things. That's also just from a whole different angle why I don't think it would be a good idea.
So if you are a small employer who may not have the resources to do so, what would be your recommendations?
Yeah. If you don't have the resources to make sure that the employee can work from home.
To provide every employee with a laptop, computer, or whatever. So the basic needs, yes, but the technology piece, whether or not they need to have a laptop or a mobile phone device, whatever that might be, if you don't have the finances as a small business, what would be the recommendation?
Well, I mean, if an employee wasn't using a computer while they were working with you at the office, then 9 times out of 10, the job that they're doing doesn't require a computer. So if they are at home and they don't have a computer, then they probably can't really get their job done. Like they can't really work from home. So they must be an employee that's in a category that they can't work from home. Because if they're at the office working with you and while they're there, they have a desktop or they have a laptop or they have whatever they have at their office working for you, you should be able to unplug all that stuff and send it home with them. You know what I mean?
Got it. Got it.
But if they have a job, that they were doing for you that doesn't include a computer, then that's technically a job that they can't do from home. And you should probably look at a furlough or a, temporary layoff if they can't come into the office. That's one of those essential needs to be in the office types of jobs.
That makes sense.
Okay. So some other major takeaways, just to make sure, is number one, create your proactive playbook and strategy. Think about all the areas that we've talked about today and make sure that you thought them through and put them in place. You also want to add posters and your hygiene reminders, designate your social distancing with visual markers, and do what you got to do in order to keep your employees safe. And make sure that you've got good video conferencing capabilities. If you are confused about how to use Zoom, take a quick online course, watch a couple of YouTube videos, and you should be good to go, and virtually meet whenever is possible. Those are major takeaways. So the number one question that I get all the time is, how do I implement this playbook? And I kind of started from the very beginning with how to implement. You want to create it. You want to meet with your team. You want to pick your workplace coordinator. You want to think through the 3 areas that we just went through, talk about what you're going to do and what your policy is going to be doing, document it all into a little playbook, and train your employees on it and communicate it with them. Those are kind of the steps, but you want to make sure that you're prepared, that you stay on top of things through your workplace coordinator. And when you don't know, ask, look around, do your research, ever learning. Obviously, as entrepreneurs, we know what that is because we're constantly learning new things, but the Center for Disease Control has great resources to stay up to date. We at Big HR also have a COVID-19 toolkit that is a one-stop shop. It includes all the playbooks and the policies and the procedures and your forms and information on everything to ensure that your employers have access to everything that they need. And the COVID-19 toolkit, to give you an idea, there's a lot of them out there though. It's a comprehensive online resource library that is available to everyone in real time. That is the link to access the COVID-19 HR toolkit. It is currently available for all big HR clients. If you are not a current big HR client, then there is a price to actually have access to the toolkit. But I have a discount code for everyone who's on the call today and a member of the President's Council if you want to get into it. But this is some of the stuff that it includes. Training videos and articles and news, your audio lessons, HR alerts, online training courses, focus on how to implement sick leave policies and emergency family medical leave and COBRA and just everything you can think of. There's policy templates, there's process and procedure documents and forms, everything that you need in order to implement COVID-19 HR under COVID-19. And so here's the link to it again, the President's Council coupon. If you want it, you will just enter Prez 2020 at that link and it will automatically take 10% off of the toolkit for you. So you'll have access to it. And then, just really wrap your mind around the fact that it's a new world out there. You got to prepare for it. You got to get ready. Don't get caught off guard. As requirements continue to relax, you have to understand that they're expecting numbers to rise. And some of those people that get it might be your employees, might be people that you work with. And as an employer, you want to alleviate as much stress as possible, and being proactive will help you do that. So I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I'm going to open it up for some questions. I did promise you a free gift if you stayed through the whole thing. So guess what I've got? I've got your very own post-corona playbook template. Ha ha ha. Everyone's like, how am I going to put this template together? Well, Cheryl's going to give it to you. All you got to do is go to CherylCPerez.com/post-corona plan, and you can access your return to work template and playbook. It will walk you through everything that I just went over, give you examples of policies and procedures, and actually break down the entire playbook that you can put together when you meet with your team and picking your workplace coordinator. So make sure you check it out. CherylCPerez.com/post-corona plan. You can go to it right now or even on your phone. and you will get your very own template. So do we have
That is
more
awesome.
questions?
We have one question posted on the chat. If an employer hires a new employee during COVID-19, how should on-site training be managed?
On-site training, that's very specific. So if you hire a new employee and they are going through on-site training, then your playbook, whatever your policies are with regards to your playbook, applies to anything that's happening on-site. So if you're talking about like an orientation meeting, let's just say I'm going to pull an orientation meeting, then you want to make sure that it can take place from a social distancing perspective if you have to do it face to face. You know, if you're sitting in a conference room or you're sitting in a room, masks should be worn. If you're in a public place, I mean, if you're in a general place, down at the other end of the table, and then after the meeting is over, everybody wipes everything down, everybody continues to institute it. When people are in the office, they're still going to interact. The goal is everything that you would do if you were around people in the grocery store, you should also do if you are at your place of work. So wear your mask, hand sanitize, but you can still do on-site training. You just need to make sure that social distancing is included in that. And really think about what training you're instituting. If you can make, and I know everybody's not like me, but I'm real quick, y'all, to make a quick training video and email it to somebody. If you can do that, then do that. It's not only great during COVID-19, it's also very great from an employer perspective and just keeping things efficient and effective for whenever you hire a new employee. Our entire employee training program here at Big HR is online. It's videos. I can put an employee for their first week down and have them go through 5 different modules of learning every single system with screen shares, and they can do that without having to come in contact with an actual physical trainer. So start thinking out the box from that perspective, and make a quick training video that you can send to them, or that you can have them sitting alone at their desk watching. Those are some options for you if you're hiring new employees. Interviewing definitely should be done, I would say virtually, until you've made the decision to hire that person. They have to actually physically come in.
We have another question. Shantae asked, could you please show the slide again with the discount code?
Oh, sure. Let me go back. There you go. Perez 2020. You like that, Erica?
Yes. Play on both names. Are there any other questions? We invite you now to open up your mics and ask the questions directly to Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Good information as usual, Cheryl. Quick question, will you be sharing the PowerPoint with us?
Yes, Erica, I believe you recorded this, right?
Yes, we recorded it and it will live on our website. We'll send out a document as well as share all of the PowerPoints.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that download, that post-corona plan, it does have a lot of the details in it as well that we went over. So if you grab that, it's kind of like a Cliff Notes. Any other questions or?
I don't see any other questions. I just want to give us a brief second to make certain that there are none. I didn't see any additional in the chat. So if you have any questions, raise your hand or go ahead and open your mic and present the questions.
While we're waiting on questions, I do want to make sure that I can answer a couple of things that have come up over the last few days, just in case you guys hadn't thought about it. What happens if you tell your employees that they have to wear a mask and somebody tells you that they can't or that they won't? Can you fire them? I've gotten that question. And the answer is, if you require in your back to work playbook and your policy that employees wear masks while they are not sitting alone at their desks, because we have most of the policies include that. If you're alone at your desk and you're social distanced, then you can take your mask off. But if you're in the hallway, if you're going to the bathroom, if you're whatever, you have to wear your mask. You may have an employee say no. If the employee cannot show you why a medical disability is preventing them from wearing a mask with support from a physician, then they are not protected under ADA. So that means that you should do, just for purposes of the fact that everybody is really stressed out, have a lot of anxiety, and being a small business, you do not want to be, just doesn't have no empathy right now. So do everything that you can to accommodate this employee, everything that you can. But you get to a point where you can no longer accommodate and they're just not cooperating and they do not have a legit disability or medical reason for not wearing it. You can begin to enforce your disciplinary process. So write them up. First warning, second warning, whatever your disciplinary process is, and I have a whole different recommendation on that, but whatever it is, begin to institute it and take them through it. And if they continue to refuse, then they are subject to termination. So you are protected in that respect. You can make your employees, if they work for you and it's a company policy, wear a mask.
Cheryl, we want to thank you so much for this information. It's been very helpful. I do encourage all of our participants to please take advantage of the playbook that Cheryl is donating. Please utilize the coupon code. This will be great information for everyone to take advantage of. We will make certain, again, to share the slides and the presentations, and also to provide direct contact information for Cheryl and her team. So thank you again, Cheryl, for the great information.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Please stay safe.
I also wanted to remind everyone to please make certain, if you have not done so, to complete your census. We know that the resources that our cities and our neighborhoods receive are allocated by the census data, and the coronavirus has magnified the importance of participating in the census. So please make certain that you do participate and provide your information to the census. Also, I want to again remind everyone that we encourage you to contact the President's Council via email, phone, and web, and to follow us and interact with us on our social media platforms. Please like, follow, share, subscribe, comment, and post questions. We want to hear from you and know your ideas on what you need from us as the engine for Black business growth. A link to today's webinar, along with the slide presentations, again, will be shared with each participant. Additionally, we ask and encourage each of you to complete the brief post-webinar survey. From this survey, we are going to select 3 businesses to receive free HR services from Cheryl Perez and her team at Big HR, compliments of the President's Council EEAYB program. But again, in order to qualify, you must complete the survey at the end of the webinar. Thank you all again for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with each of you.